This segment of DelmarvaLife is brought to you by Peninsula Regional Medical Center.
In 2003, at only 20 years of age, NASCAR driver Brian Vickers won the Busch Series championship, becoming the youngest champion in the history of the series. And from that point on, Vickers has been full speed ahead. That is, until October of last year. That's when the driver of the number 55 car was forced to park his car after experiencing a deep vein thrombosis, or DVT, for the second time in his young career. DVT is the formation of a blood clot in a deep vein in the leg. It's usually caused by prolonged periods of immobility. In some cases, the blood clot can travel from your legs to your lungs and cause a pulmonary embolism, a serious, potentially life-threatening complication of DVT. You may remember back in 2003 when NBC News correspondent David Bloom died of a pulmonary embolism while covering the war in Iraq. Bloom had spent days confined in a small, specially outfitted M88 tank recovery vehicle from which he broadcast frontline video. Fortunately, Brian Vickers' DVT was discovered before it was too late, and Brian joins us to let us know how he's doing. Thanks for joining us this afternoon, Brian.
Well, thanks for having me on.
Well, first of all, I got to ask you, how you feeling?
I'm feeling great. I feel like I could be in a race car. Unfortunately, I just can't.
Oh, okay. Well, soon enough, I'm sure. Now, how did you first discover that you had a blood clot?
Well, the first time was in 2010, and I had, some shortness of breath and some pain in my chest and my legs, and I largely ignored those signs and symptoms, and that's part of the reason I'm here today. And partnering with Janssen is to raise awareness to clotting. It's a serious issue, and largely ignored at times and misdiagnosed. The first time I ended up basically being forced to go to the hospital, it got to the point where I couldn't breathe. And once I was there, they found out I had a clot, and they treated me with Coumadin, a traditional older medication. It comes with a lot of restrictions, unfortunately. Not only did it take me out of the race car, which is something I love and my passion and in my profession, but it also came with dietary restrictions and travel restrictions and blood draws constantly. And being someone that doesn't like needles, that was a hard one to swallow. But part of the process, and I was able to complete that treatment and get back in the race car. And then a few years later, this fall, unfortunately, I had another clot, and this time it was provoked by a boot on my foot. I had a mid-foot sprain on my right foot, and I had to wear a boot for about a month. And when I took that boot off, I had some pain and some swelling and a knot in my right calf. This time I did not ignore those signs and symptoms, I called my doctor immediately. He recommended getting an ultrasound, and but we were able to catch it. I did have a clot. We were able to catch it before it traveled to my lungs this more recent time, thankfully. Yeah. He also prescribed me a different medication this time that didn't have the dietary restrictions and travel restrictions and the constant blood draws, which was a huge win for me, and really changed my life outside the car. Obviously, being on a blood thinner, there's always the risk of bleeding, so I still couldn't be in the race car, but I've got a 3-month treatment, and hope to be complete, and the plan is to be complete at the end of January, and to be back in the race car for the Daytona 500 in February, and hopefully go win another race for Aaron's and everyone on the MWR team.
Yeah, and I mean, going back to that second time when you felt that clot, you knew right away?
Yeah, I didn't know that it was a clot right away. That's obviously up to a doctor, and ultimately, even he's going to, look to the tools he has at hand, like an ultrasound. But I suspected that it was not a good thing. Right. It was a constant pain and a knot in my calf that just wouldn't go away, and some slight swelling and redness, which are all signs of a potential clot. So I called him immediately. He recommended ultrasound, and we found the clot. There's a lot of it's difficult if you've never had one to know those things, and I didn't the first time. I ignored those signs the first go around. There's some websites though, stoptheclot.org, clotconnect.org are great resources for people to educate themselves on the science and symptoms of clotting, especially this time of year. People tend to be more sedentary in the winter, and they travel more. Being in long car rides or long plane rides can certainly lead to potential potential clots.
Now, you had mentioned, obviously, this changed your driving. You were unable to be in the race car. How has it changed your daily life? What were some of the changes you had to make in your daily life?
Well, the first time I had to make a lot of changes. I had, when I was on Coumadin, I had dietary restrictions, and traveling was a nuisance. It was a hassle because of the blood draws. I had to have my blood monitored and drawn, and if I wasn't drawn at a doctor's office, I had to have my finger pricked constantly to monitor my INR levels, which was essentially your vitamin K levels. And so it affected my life dramatically. This more recent time, I'm on a different medication and it doesn't require any of that. So obviously I can't be in a race car, but my life day to day hasn't changed a lot. I actually just got back from an elk hunt in Wyoming and a memorial hunt with some friends, and coming up soon, I'm going to be on my honeymoon with my wife in South Asia, so I'm traveling halfway around the world, and that wouldn't have been possible before, but I was married recently, so she's very excited, and looking forward to having a great honeymoon and trying some new foods and new cultures in South Asia, and then get back to racing in February at the Daytona.
Absolutely. All right, so you've told us all about the symptoms and signs and everything. If there's one message you could give our viewers about what you've gone through, what would it be?
I think the biggest message I could say is, I know it's difficult, but try to educate yourself on something like this. This is a very serious issue, and be aware of the signs and symptoms, and don't ignore them. If you have a problem, call your doctor. Go see a doctor and try to figure out what it is. Hopefully it's not a clot, but if it is, it's treatable. There's some great new medications on the market that are available, and it's way better than ignoring them, because if you ignore them, this can, a DVT can easily turn into a pulmonary embolism, a clot in the lungs like it did for me, and it could be, life-threatening.
All right, Brian, thanks for sharing your story, and enjoy your honeymoon. And Brian is not alone. Each year, nearly 1 million people experience a deep vein thrombosis or pulmonary embolism. Here's Jimmy with more.
Lisa, thanks. As Brian mentioned, the occurrence of DVT increases during the winter months. Why? And how do we avoid becoming a victim like Brian Vickers? Well, here to help us answer those questions is Dr. Doug Wilhite, who is a vascular surgeon with Peninsula Regional Medical Center. Thank you so much for coming in this afternoon.
Thank you for having me.
I got a ton of questions for you. So it's been freezing cold, chilly, and this time of year is supposed to be even worse for DVTs. Why?
Well, there's some really interesting data that we've seen the last several years that suggests that DVT is probably 10 or 15% more common in the winter months. We think that's primarily due to immobility. We don't move around as much in the winter and try to stay inside, probably spend a little bit more time on the couch than we should, and that seems to be the reason that happens. There may be a role in vasoconstriction, where the blood vessels squeeze down and become a little bit tighter in the cold weather as well, that adds to that.
Okay, so you mentioned the winter specifically. Is this an issue any time of year?
All year long, immobility can lead to DVT. That's really the primary risk factor for it.
Okay, so are there other risk factors that we need to watch out for?
Anything that injures the body, any type of injury or trauma, hospitalization, major surgery, and for some patients there's underlying factors that may put them at risk, a genetic abnormality that makes their blood thicker than a regular person's blood that can cause them to be at higher risk for DVT.
So one of the things that Brian mentioned was he's had 2 of them relatively quickly. So you think there might be something that could possibly be causing that to happen?
Well, it's always hard to know when you're hearing somebody's story kind of second or third hand, especially on the television.
Right.
But anyone who's had 2 clots back to back, you do worry that there may be something more to that.
Okay, well, that's an important thing there. So a DVT can lead to a pulmonary embolism. Explain that to me again and how that happens.
So DVT, or deep vein thrombosis, simply refers to a blood clot that's in a major vein in the body, usually in the leg, but it can be in other locations as well.
What are we seeing here?
That's a picture demonstrating the vein in the leg with the red clot lodged within it.
Yeah.
It looks right around the valve in the vein, which is frequently where we see these clots begin and tend to get stuck. At the beginning, when a clot forms, it's very much like grape jelly. It's kind of watery but chunky and can break off and move within the blood flow. If it breaks off, that's what we refer to as embolization. All the veins in the body lead back to the right side of the heart, which then leads to the lungs. So a clot that breaks off is going to travel right to there. It can get lodged either in the heart or in the lung, where we call it a pulmonary embolus, and cause trouble with the function of the heart and also with the lungs, with breathing.
Okay, so what are the treatment options for DVT?
When you're diagnosed with DVT or with pulmonary embolus, you're treated with anticoagulation or thinning of the blood.
Right.
And that can be done with a variety of different types of medications. Some are given as pills, some as intravenous, some even as shots.
Okay, so if somebody has a DVT, is there something we can do to try to prevent a reoccurrence?
Oh, absolutely. You know, the most important step is to identify why the patient developed the DVT. For at least half or maybe more patients, there's an identifiable cause, usually a recent surgery or a recent injury, wearing a cast, as Brian mentioned for him.
Right.
Those all can lead to forming a DVT. For some patients, it's more difficult to identify the cause, and some blood testing may be required. Once that cause is identified, eliminating it can help prevent a future DVT. For the immobilized patient, simply getting them moving again is how you reduce their risk of future DVT.
What about support hose? Does that help any?
They can be helpful. They're not treatment alone for DVT. Support hose are very helpful for another condition that we call superficial thrombophlebitis, or what Grandma used to call her phlebitis.
Right.
You got the knot on the leg and it's a little bit painful. That superficial vein clot, that gets better with a little bit of support and usually some Motrin. The deeper vein clots, the support hose help very much with controlling the swelling that comes with DVT and are part of the treatment.
Dr. Doug Wilhite, PRMC, thank you so much. Great information that we need to remember. Now, if you'd like to read more about deep vein thrombosis, as well as Peninsula Regional Medical Center, you can go to our website, DelmarvaLife.com, and click on the Show tab. Okay, so we're going to stick with your health. You may have made it your New Year's resolution to shed a few pounds. I know I have. A little bit later on, we're going to learn some diet traps that could be sabotaging your weight loss goals. You also probably have some financial goals. We're going to learn how what's going on in Washington may have an impact on your wallet this year. Delmarva Life. We'll be right back.